Welcome everyone to the first series of webinars hosted by the Great Indoors. My name is Marjolein Verleg. I am EMEA Marketing Communications Manager at Tarkett for the segments Workplace and Hospitality. TheGreatIndoors.eu is an online platform powered by Tarkett to inform and inspire the ever-evolving work-life conversation and help create healthy, flourishing workspaces. And in the wake of COVID-19, we are launching an exciting new webinar series called the Rethinking Workplace, drawing on Tarkett's own extensive research around the wants and needs of office workers across the globe, both pre and post COVID-19. Because, and I think you can all agree with me, is that there's a lot of discussion currently going on about what the role of the office will be going forward. Well, as well as presenting our own findings, the Rethinking Workplace webinar series will also bring together insights from key industry experts around the world. And starting off today, we bring you Nardini, workplace strategist and managing director of WKspace in London. Hannah will share insights from her global research, exploring how both employee and employee attitudes towards the office have changed and continue to change in the aftermath of COVID-19. So over to you in London, Hannah, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with people. So hopefully you've got this come up in front of you. Perfect. So I'm going to make a start running through a huge amount of data. We have embarked on a series of global surveys since March the 30th. They're running every single week. We have data up until the 4th of July, so there's still data emerging and coming through. So far, we're on over 51,000 survey responses, so it's a pretty extensive piece of research. It initially started with us kind of trying to understand from our own perspective as workplace strategists, kind of what it meant for us and our sector and what we needed to do differently. And as we started to learn more from the data that was emerging, we started to realise that it was really valuable to share this information with the wider audience. So we've actually given a series of different webinars over the past few months as the data has emerged. Now, there was a strict criteria in filling in our surveys. We had to make sure that the people who were responding to our data captures were relevant, and we needed to make sure that they were regular office workers pre-COVID. So we didn't want to talk to people initially who just purely worked from home. We were quite particular about the size of the organisation, so we were really looking at 50 plus employees initially. We wanted people who were much more kind of desk-based rather than potentially retail or kind of more in-field workers. In the United Kingdom, obviously, we've had a furlough scheme, and we wanted to make sure that people who were on furlough were excluded from the survey initially because they couldn't quite quantify comments around what it's like to work from home if they've not really experienced it. So there was a really strict criteria that has made sure that we've achieve the best quality data, and this is what we're going to share with you today. You can see to the right all of the different countries that we have engaged with, so quite extensively within the United Kingdom, but a huge amount of research across Europe. We've covered all of North America, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, China, Japan, Australia, and the UAE, so there's quite a wide variety there. We've also looked at it by sector, so I could talk about this for days. We're not going to get time to go into exact country filters today, but if there is anything specific you would like to find out, please do get in touch with us, and we're happy to share some of the key insights depending on the country that you're located in. So let's make a start. So we've been asking people over the past few weeks about their job security. And the reason that we've been starting with this question is if people are particularly stressed or anxious, the way that they complete the survey might be ever so slightly distorted or biased. So we've always been checking our surveys right at the very outset. We've been doing something called the perceived stress scale, just to see where people are sitting, to check that anxiety levels are within manageable tolerances. We're glad to see that generally it is. So we do believe that the data is coming from an unbiased source. But there are fears and concern about job security. I'll be honest, it's increasing on a weekly basis. And this is the data as of up to the start of July. We're starting to see that as more and more redundancies are announced, the concern about job security is significantly increasing. However, what this figure is quite reassuring is we have 63% of employees saying that they are slightly or seriously concerned about their job security. It's quite reassuring that employers are perceiving this as well. They're very closely aligned in their thinking to their employee base, because 56% of them feel that, yes, our people are worried about their job security. It is something that they do need to be considering. As far as the sectors in particular we're noticing, predominantly the main concerns are coming through from technology, construction, finance and insurance were the main sectors that were showing particular concern. We're also seeing concern amongst the Generation X cohort, so the kind of 35 to sort of 50-ish age ranges were showing higher concerns about job security. They were also the cohort that had children, so they probably have a lot more family responsibilities. An economic crisis obviously is naturally going to cause higher anxiety. So it is something to be mindful of within your own organisation, the level of employees that you do have. We started to ask people there about their actual employment and what might influence their employment. So we saw that particularly in the short term, people aren't looking to have jobs where they're necessarily having to travel significantly. So we saw 57% of people, and this is all of the global data bolted together, where we saw a consistent pattern. 57% were concerned to travel internationally. This is mostly driven by employers. So them in particular were saying that they wouldn't want to be traveling internationally at the moment. And a lot of people didn't want to be using public transport. There was a lot more of a desire to move towards greener travel. So could you walk? Could you cycle? What are the alternative methods of traveling to the office without public transport? What we thought was quite an interesting figure, though, is people who would consider changing jobs if they weren't able to work from home. We've seen this massive global experiment on working from home. And we've also found that a lot of the previous skeptics, all those who were saying it doesn't work and I don't want to be working from home, it's not effective, have become converts. They're now realizing, actually, I do quite enjoy this. I can be quite productive working from home. And we see that 53% of people see it so valuable that they would change their jobs to make sure that it's something that they would like to see retained in future. Work-life balance has come out top of every single survey that we've run with our own clients, but also our global research. People would like to keep an element of balance and control over their lifestyle. We're seeing the greatest emergence now of well-being, more than we've ever seen. It was a big issue before COVID. It's become a bigger issue now since COVID. We also see that people would judge an employer on how they treated their people. In the UK, obviously with the furlough scheme that we've had, a lot of people have told us that they would judge their employer as being morally wrong if they were to not take advantage of some of these schemes and actually just get rid of people and seeing it as an opportunity. So it's something to be mindful of. Again, the decisions you make now as an employer will impact how people see you and whether they want to work for you in future. We're starting to see, again, an emergence of employee empowerment. But culturally, the impact that this has had on cultures is something that we can't overlook either. So how do people feel working from home? Over the course of the past 14 weeks, we've been tracking it. You can see in week 6, we started to see a peak across all different measures. Week 6 was this utopia position where life is great and I'm loving this, and this is a great experiment. To suddenly you'll notice that where we're at now, it's plateaued. And this is nothing unusual. This is exactly as we've been expecting. What it means is things have settled down. People have just adjusted to their new routines. Whilst we have seen stress levels rise ever so sort of significantly over the past few weeks, we're noticing a lot of this is also channeled around offices that are reactivating or reopening. What we're seeing is people have gone through a rapid change curve and they've suddenly adjusted to working in this brand new environment. And then the thoughts of having to change all over again to go back into the office has raised some levels of stress and anxiety. And that's to be expected. People have created their new patterns and routines and they're kind of not wanting to see those as disrupted. But nevertheless, there are lots of positive experiences that we have seen from people who are working from home. And this is without a doubt driving the desire to keep working from home as an ongoing pattern. How have people's perceptions changed though around work and workplace? Right in the early days, you'll notice week 4, 64% of people were saying, wow, this is a significant change for me and this has forever changed the way I'm going to work. Again, as we start to get to week 14, the novelty has started to wear a little bit. And again, completely normal. But people are starting to be more sensible and realistic about the opportunities that this is creating. But nevertheless, quite levelly, there's about 10% of people saying, this actually isn't going to change much. I want to go back to the old way of doing things. But we're seeing quite an even split between those who are saying, yes, this has changed things to some extent, and I will take an element of this forward, to 46% of people are saying, this is a major change, and this is going to completely radicalize how I'm working. That is particularly being driven by the youngest of the generations. Generation Z and the millennials are the ones who are saying this is more of a significant shift. And this is interesting to us because these are your future leaders. So we're seeing a potential revolution amongst the younger generations and their attitude and their views towards the work and also their workplace. So it'll be interesting to see how this one evolves over the next few months and years. So there's been a lot of talk about people saying, that's it, the office is disappearing, we no longer need offices. There were some companies very quick to spring up saying that they were getting rid of their offices and they realised that everything could be done remote. We've not seen that. The office is here to stay. Now, 31% of people have said, it's still vital to me. I can't perform my job effectively without it. So we still absolutely need it. 54% of people, though, are saying, it's still really important to me. I still want to have a base that I can go to. However, it's a little bit less important to me now than it was previously because I've suddenly had this new world of working opened up to me and the ability to work remotely. And there's just 15% of people saying, actually, we don't need an office at the moment. But when you look at that 15%, it's a very small number of people who are saying that they do feel that the workplace maybe has lost its value. So overall, we're seeing a definite majority in favour of keeping the office. How do employers think that everything has gone over the recent weeks? It's quite good to see that employers are rating themselves pretty highly on how they've adapted. So the majority feel that this has not been without its problems, but nevertheless, people and the organisation themselves have adapted very quickly and relatively straightforward. What we found was quite interesting from this data, though, is that only 30% of employers said that they were already experienced in measuring on outputs. Now, from our own engagement surveys with our clients, we've learned that this has been probably one of the biggest challenges that they've faced. They've suddenly had to move to a trust-based culture. They can't see people. Presenteeism has been broken overnight. And for some organisations, they didn't have systems and processes in place that enable them to measure performance from a physical output perspective. So there's a very rapid learning curve happening right now for organisations to start measuring more specifically on outputs. And we need that to be happening. We don't want to slip back into the old way of presenteeism when the workplace does finally fully reopen. We're also seeing that 67% of employers are saying that they will give their employees autonomy over how and where they would like to work. And this is a big shift. Our data prior to COVID, this was only around 30%. So we've seen a big change in this of employers saying, yes, if people will be more productive working from home, let's allow them to make that decision. So a huge amount of positives have come through. It's also great to see that there have been engagement surveys run. If you haven't run one within your organisation, we strongly recommend that you do. Start collecting this data and creating your own benchmark of where you are today and help to put in some measurable success going forward. So, sharing information about going back into the workplace. We saw in week 6, which was the highest of the data, 76% of people told us that they wanted to know the exact details of what the workplace was going to be like when it reopened. Now, we've also asked people more recently have you actually received this information? It's good to see that 71% of employers have been sharing this information. If you haven't yet embarked on your reactivation project, I strongly recommend the importance of communicating. People don't need to know stuff that you don't have the answers to, but they do want to know that you've thought about things. Where are you thinking? How are you going to manage social distancing measures? What does the short term look like for you? It's really important that we start sharing as much as possible. We ask people as well, what do they think is likely to happen in the short term? And we've noticed an interesting shift in all of this. A lot of workplaces are actually staying closed. A lot of our clients are talking about September, October, some are saying early in the new year. Some have even pushed it to March or June of 2021. So we're not seeing a lot of organisations rush to reopen the doors. But for those who are, we're also interested in understanding, what are you planning on doing? There are so many different suggestions around of how you manage social distancing in the workplace. Only 13% of people told us, though, or employers told us, that they plan on buying products that are designed to help them manage social distancing. There's a lot of thought around, should we really be spending money on what is just a temporary measure? We don't know how long this measure is going to go on for. So there is an element of practicality to this. However, a lot of employers are now taking a step back and thinking about the longer term. Where are we best placing our resources? Let's think about where we want to end up and take the time that we've got now to appraise our options and think about how the world of work and workplace is going to change for us. So therefore, we haven't seen this great emergence of these very simple adaptations that have gone on. 19%, in fact, have said that they don't plan on making any changes. Their offices are pretty much going to stay closed. 13% didn't quite know yet. 43% just plan on doing something themselves. So their own facilities teams are picking up, for example, hygiene stations, or just making some very simple removing chairs out of the way. Only 12% have embraced employing professional companies to manage this for them. Now, I'm actually quite pleased to see this. I would prefer companies really do take that time to step back and really think about what is the most appropriate option for them on the longer term, and really use their resources, which at the moment are incredibly precious. Let's use it as wisely as we possibly can. So let's think about health and hygiene. There's a lot of conversation around hygiene stations. I think that's a pretty much expected thing. 77% of people support having more hygiene stations. What the desire was no matter where I'm sitting, I can see one. So that was kind of driving the ambition for a lot more of them. But only 51% of people are supporting the idea of temperature checks. The general feeling towards this is it actually that reliable? So if you were just to rely on maybe the temperature checks, people felt that it wasn't an accurate detection very early on for the virus. But we saw that 71% of people actually had faith in their colleagues. This is nice to see. They felt that their colleagues would observe hygiene and social distancing standards. But there's also 14% of people have told us that they don't plan on following any rules. They don't want to be told what they should and shouldn't be doing. This is tricky because you're trying to manage the health and well-being of everybody, and you're going to have some people who are maybe bucking that trend and going their own way. So there was a lot of support from our surveys. In fact, 85% of employees support behavioural contracts, which means that everybody subscribes to a particular code of conduct. And it's about a commitment that comes with consequences if it is broken. So people are really seeing the value in these contracts to make sure that the health and well-being of every person is managed and adequately maintained. We're also looking at these particular aspects in the workplace in the short term. All of the touch points, all of these things that people will touch and share, how do people feel about them now? And it's interesting because as part of our change management process that we run, one of the biggest obstacles we have is getting people to use less paper, less storage, let's try and get rid of stuff, let's print less. And we're suddenly starting to see that this has naturally started to happen. So 57% of people straight out said, let's just get rid of a load of our filing, we can reduce it. Not quite ready to go paperless just yet, but people have survived without it, working from home. Only 14% of people said that they'd missed it. So look at the opportunities you have to have a cull. Let's get rid of as much as we possibly can. Same with printers. We're seeing a lot of organisations just do a 50% reduction straight away in the amount of printers and copiers on the floor. It's removing the touch points where a lot of people are going to be sharing these facilities. So it helps in that short term, but also puts us on the pattern to some good habits in the long term, particularly if we're going to be changing the way that we're working. Same with stationery. Just look at reducing it. If we're trying to have this messaging around less paper and less printing, it goes quite in a logical way that you're going to need less stationery, hopefully. So look at reducing that. We also saw an interesting shift in shared mugs and cutlery. A definite drive towards we should have our own. Each person is responsible for looking after their own mug. They clean it, they store it, or you look at disposable products. But let's not forget, 87% of people are wanting to be more mindful of their sustainability and their environmental impact. So therefore, anything you do consider needs to come in a mechanism that is biodegradable. You need to, again, think about the overall messaging here. Other areas that we've struggled with change management is the lack of personalisation at the desk. Some people are very emotionally attached to what's on their desks and their photographs. But in the short term, people are willing to let this go. They are saying, 90% of people saying, let's operate a complete clear desk policy, because it's actually easier to clean the desk when there's no clutter on it. You have been gifted a golden opportunity to have a cull. So make the most of this. This is one of the hardest habits to break. And people are saying, yes, in the interests of hygiene, absolutely, we support that. Same with not eating at desks. A lot of bacteria comes from people eating, and if food drops into the keyboard, it's one of the areas that isn't cleaned as efficiently. And therefore people are saying, absolutely, we shouldn't necessarily be eating at the desk. So let's use it as an opportunity to come together and socialise. And let's think about how that can be facilitated in dining spaces or breakout areas within the workplace. But also 86% of people are supportive of a housekeeping rule or a protocol. It's a personal ownership. This isn't just the responsibility of a facilities team. This is everybody's responsibility. And it comes on everybody to make sure that they clean the space after they've finished with it. Or if they're not sure about the hygiene of it when they've just arrived at it, well, there's a hygiene station right by you. Give it a bit of a clean down. Let's reinstate the sense of respect for each other, but also for the workplace. So we asked people about materials. Now, there's nothing scientific about this question that we asked in our survey. We literally just wanted to gauge from people's perceptions whether they were impacted on whether they'd use a space or not by the type of material that was used in that space. And purely on perceptions, we started to see that 69% of people told us that their decision on whether they'd use a space or not would be affected by the type of product or material that was in use. What we see is people are rating what they think the most hygienic of finishes would be laminate, glass, wood, ceramic, and vinyl were the kind of very top ones, with metal as well. There's a lot of reports about, for example, copper, and germs don't live as long on copper surfaces. We saw that carpet was scoring at just 14%. The biggest driver on flooring within the workplace actually was vinyl. And people felt that it was easy to maintain, it looked clean, it gave the perception of hygiene. But we also started to see that fabric, just 8% of people felt that fabric was hygienic. There was a lot of concern and anxiety, particularly when we started to share photographs of sofas and armchairs, people feeling that maybe just the fabric option wasn't right. So it has started to make us think about maybe more harder surfaces in some areas, which are easier to maintain and make people feel a little bit more comfortable and confident in that cleaning regime. So yeah, a consideration on the type of product that maybe potentially we're looking at in the work settings. So virtual meetings, we've heard a lot about Zoom fatigue. People are getting tired of virtual meetings. We've heard a lot of people telling us that they are spending longer in meetings than they've ever spent. They just jump onto calls all the time. That has a detriment as well, which we'll touch on in a moment. But nevertheless, virtual meetings have been effective. It has worked. So 78% of people are saying, I think this is here for the long term. We're going to keep these going. However, in the past 4 weeks, we've started to learn that people have realized that relationships with clients, and particularly in this point, new clients, have suffered through virtual meetings. They feel that it's no way comparative to a face-to-face meeting where you start to build a meaningful relationship. So we're starting to learn again, particularly from the legal sector, the importance of these face-to-face meetings. There is still a need to have meeting facilities that are provided within your workplace. Some people felt that maybe the first few meetings with a new client should be done in person. And when you feel comfortable and confident in that relationship, then there's an opportunity to potentially move that to more virtual means. So people are starting to see that there's a bit of a balance needing to come in how we have virtual meetings. So what type of office are people wanting? We've been testing this out because, again, there's a lot of talk in a lot of countries about this hub and spoke model. Do we have one main office with loads of distributed hubs around? We're still, even after all of these weeks of research, only at 20% of people saying that's what they want. People are still driving for this main central office. And their reason for this is they're telling us that if they're mostly working from home, they're going into the office for a reason. Their reason might be to collaborate. It might be to meet with clients or with team members, and it's to socialize. The general feeling is I'm prepared to put up with the commute if I know I'm going to be there and I'm around other people. Whereas actually, if I'm going to one of these smaller satellite offices and there's just a handful of people there, is it really worth the effort? And that's making some people feel that in that case, they may as well just continue to work from home. It does depend on the organisation. It depends where you are and the typical length of commute. So a lot of variations to this, but we're still seeing the place for the corporate headquarters and having a sense of purpose and of place. Co-working has started to increase. It was 9% in the early days. We're now at 16% on co-working spaces. The biggest anxiety to these areas is the fact that you're mingling with people who are part of other companies in a co-working space. Now, you can be sure of the standards that your company have, but you can't necessarily be sure of the standards that other people and their companies have. So until things start to settle, we're not likely to see this as a growing trend of the kind of emergence of the co-working space. Again, 15% of people telling us, again, replicating our other bits of data, that do we need an office? So still quite a minor percentage. What measures, though, do companies think they need to put in place? It's sad to see that 16% of people are saying potentially they're going to have to make redundancies. The sector that this was in was technology, retail, finance, and publishing in particular. But people are also considering other options. The go-to option right now is this: real estate is expensive. If more people are going to be working from home, do we need as much space? And it's one of the most obvious and simple ways to look at making cost savings is to start by looking at your real estate. So 32% of people told us, or employers told us, that that's what they would start with. But people are starting to look at the 4-day week or cutting hours. They are looking at sabbaticals. They're looking at retraining. So allowing people maybe to shift their pattern so they're not doing the traditional 9 to 5 as a means of saving money. But 4% of companies have told us that they're actually planning on growing, which is good to see. So we'll see how this plans out over the longer term. But there are changes afoot, which means that when we asked employers, well, what do you think could happen to your real estate? 44% of them are saying, we don't need as much space. I have to say that's consistent with all of our clients as well. We're seeing a go-to response of, we want to make a 30% space saving. And that seems to be where a lot of our clients are going. We have some clients who are even talking about 50% space reductions. There's 35% of people saying that they plan on keeping the same amount of space. But interestingly, these are also the companies that feel that they will be changing the way that they're working. So they think that they're likely to be growing in headcount. They think that they will re-engineer their processes, and until they've got that established, they don't want to make decisions about their real estate just yet because it may have space implications. And 21% are saying, actually, I think we need more space. This is more of a short-term thinking around social distancing. but generally we're seeing a consensus across the board. Space rationalisation is tending to be the emerging trend. When we've asked employers what they think the pattern will be, in the short term for us is up until vaccination, and long term is post-vaccination. We've started to see these two have morphed together. The difference between them is no longer as great as it was. So we're seeing that the short term and the long term, being back in the office long term is likely to sit at around 11% from an employer's perspective. But they're also happy to see that actually a portion of the people can work from home. They can continue to stay working from home. It's been proven to be successful, as we've just demonstrated from the other bits of data. So there is an opportunity for them to perhaps reappraise where and how people are choosing to work. So from an employee perspective, what pattern would they like to see emerging? So we asked people to give us a gauge, and we've been tracking this on a weekly basis. It's pretty much settled over the past 4 weeks and not really moved. So we've seen that 12% of people are saying, I only want to work from home, and just 9% of people are saying, I only want to work in the office. Let's not forget, working from home doesn't suit everybody. Some people are not productive, they're not enjoying it, they've got too many distractions, they probably don't have the setup. They may be house sharing, they may be living in a space where the Wi-Fi isn't that great. There are lots of reasons why people aren't enjoying this, but also personalities. A lot of extroverts want to be around other people, and the thoughts of just being in constant isolation at home, working on your own, isn't the same, and it's not really what some people have subscribed to. So we are likely to see a little bit of a shift. We're seeing that actually the majority of people, 34% of people are saying 3 days at home, 2 days in the office, and this seems to be where it's settling. But nevertheless, the majority of people see that working 3 or more days at home is where they want to be. But that's not to say we don't need the office. There are still those people who want to be in the office on a regular basis. Now, if we were to look at managing this and say, let's control occupation, what we don't want is an office that is at capacity on a Monday, but completely deserted on a Friday. That's a very demoralizing place to be. If we were to look at putting in more of a controlled pattern of occupation, we're looking at around 45% of people in your office at any given point. And that is just taking into account the employee perspective. So does an employer see it in a different way? Reassuringly, no, they see it in a very similar way. In fact, employers see more people working from home than employees. So we see an 8% difference on employers over the employers saying working from home. But they do see more presence in the office as well, 11%. So there's a 2% shift on that one as well, of purely being office-based. In fact, what an employer sees is maybe 2 days at home and 3 days in the office is where the pattern will be. But nevertheless, if we were to balance that back out and run it through the same calculator, it's around 48%. So if we take a measure of both of them, we're still looking at less than 50% of your headcount potentially being in the office at any given point. That is opening a lot of opportunities to you. So we asked employees, in light of the current crisis and the fact that a lot of companies are going to be looking to save costs, if you're going to be working from home more, is it appropriate and fair to introduce well-managed hot desking? Now, we deliberately use the word hot desking because it's controversial. As a company, we actually have a ban on that word with our own clients. It's the worst of everything. But we used it quite deliberately in our surveys because people do understand what that word is. And people are reasonable. What you can see from this, 65% of people were fair. And they said, absolutely, if I am working from home, it doesn't make sense that I'm locking up a space in the office that is just going to sit empty for most of the week. There were 20% of people who just needed to understand how it would work for them a little bit more. Absolutely, and that's where change management comes in. 15% outright, this would absolutely not work for me. Also happen to be the same proportion of people who say that they're likely to be in the office for 4 or 5 days of the week. So to them, the thoughts of hot desking when they're there every day, we can appreciate raises a little bit more anxiety to it. So what are people who are working from home going to expect? It's not the cheap option. So yes, there are opportunities to save space if you do allow people to work from home more often. But there's also a cost of doing that, because you can see from this, 29% of people feel that their employer should provide them with the equipment that they need. For them, they see the basics. It's a desk, it's a chair, and it's a monitor. They need to be given the basics. But we're also seeing remuneration coming out quite high. So there's only 8% of people who said that they didn't expect any remuneration. In fact, a lot of people have told us that during this experience, they've saved money, but nevertheless, there's still an expectation that an employer will contribute towards the additional costs of Wi-Fi, electricity, their heating. People just want general compensation on the basis that we are saving money on the real estate, and therefore it's only right to compensate us for using our homes. You need to find out where your people are on this, but it is a cost that must be accounted for in any event. So let's look a little bit more specifically at the future. What working pattern would you like to explore? There's loads of different alternatives that people could have chosen here. We actually see 14% of people saying, I just want to go back to what I was doing. I don't want the change to be there. And you'll notice this between 10 and 15% figure is a consistent through all of our data, but it doesn't really flex beyond that. There's almost an element of people who just don't like change, and they don't want to change, and they want to go back to things that are safe and comfortable and familiar to them. And that's okay, that's part of our nature. But people are happy to consider the 4-day week. Some people are feeling that actually flexibility is really important to them. So if they can control the hours, maybe they want to take their children to school, or they want to be there to prepare dinner and eat dinner with their children. So we're seeing perhaps more of a shift towards flexi hours. That was 33%, but the 4-day week has gained more importance to people. So could they do 5 days worth of work in the 4 days? We're also seeing a lot of conversation starting to come through about the 9-day fortnight. So in effect, you work 10 days in 9 and you get an extra day off every other week. So they're starting to see perhaps a break in the traditional 9 to 5 over where it was previously. So where do people feel that they would like to perform these tasks? We started to break down typical tasks that are performed in the office. The majority of tasks that are done is concentrated working. It's where you just get stuff done. And a lot of that is done in the open plan in the offices. Work-related phone calls. We've got collaborative working, which we see as working with your team. Then we've got meetings, be it internal or external with clients, and then socializing. And we ask people to split where they would prefer to perform those tasks. We're starting to see that over 2/3 of people feel that the ability to focus and concentrate for them is better done at home. I may as well just stay at home, get that done, and then I come into the office for a specific purpose. And we're likely to see from this chart, working with your team, so more collaborative project-based working, meetings, be it internal or external meetings, and socializing. So just breaking away from being in isolation at home and mixing with other colleagues and people. We're likely to see that the purpose of the office is changing. Now, there are still those people that we mentioned aren't productive at home and don't want to work from home. We still need to give you an aspect of concentrated, focused space. But actually, the way that the space is distributed might be changing. And it might be looking more at collaboration and different types of meeting settings, but also these kind of large cafes and social spaces and breakout areas where people are coming in more for specific functions and purposes. So how's it changed how people feel about collaboration and meetings? We've got 59% of people saying, I've started to realise that I don't necessarily have to be sat right next to my colleagues to work effectively with them. This is also a big change from the work that we've done previously. A lot of people will feel a sense of security and safety by being around their immediate team, but the virtual connection has enabled them to maintain that, if not improve it. So what they're saying is, actually, I can be anywhere. I can still connect in with my colleagues. So we're starting to see perhaps the breakdown of the traditional team barriers or neighbourhoods that sit within an office. People have questioned the privacy of meetings. Not every meeting is private. You don't always need to be in a room and shutting a door. In fact, it's become commonplace with virtual meetings that you'll see people's families walk past and conversations will be happening around you. That's just become normal. So people are saying, actually I can do my meetings in a different way. We're likely to see the increase of more private spaces where people can perhaps duck into, they don't have doors, but they can jump onto virtual calls quite effectively. And people want control and autonomy. They want the freedom to choose how and where they are working. So we started to ask people more specifically about activity-based working. And activity-based working, as you know, is about a space that's designed for tasks. It's around alignment of what do I need to get done? What is the best space for me to do that? Sitting at a desk is not the way forward. It doesn't work. It's not effective. And the science has proven this over many years. So we asked people how they felt about it. And reassuringly, 16% of people said, well, I'm already doing that. 55% of people said, absolutely, I could do that, but we do need to think about the hygiene of it. So if it's managed properly and executed correctly, there is no reason why this won't work for organisations. There are 24% of people who are just saying, absolutely not, it wouldn't work for me, it's not effective. And I do appreciate there are some roles where it maybe isn't suitable for them. But there's also an element of resistance that will come through from people who maybe are fearful of change. And again, that's where change management comes in, to make sure that we bring people along on the journey. So there are opportunities to change the way that people are working. What's important? This has gone back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's gone back to all of the basics. People want a good temperature, decent daylight, decent lighting above them or task lighting. They want comfortable chairs. They want a space where they can just prepare their own food and store it. We've seen a complete reemergence of the basics, that people want to feel comfortable and to thrive when they're in the workplace. So more specifically on focus areas, focus traditionally has been around 50 to 70% of your real estate. But you'll notice open plan has dropped down to number 6 in the rankings. There are 15 different options here. And we did illustrate it with pictures. We haven't shared them because we wouldn't want people to think that we were biasing towards manufacturers or products, because we don't do that. But we asked people to tell us about the type of spaces they want. You'll notice, in fact, the top 4 here are around privacy. It's around the ability to concentrate, focus, and work without interruption for a period of time, and then move back to perhaps where your colleagues are. But there's also a need for these virtual spaces. As we've noted, they're going to be a part of our way of life. We need to make sure there are spaces for it. For collaboration, it's about project areas. It's about spaces where you can have things pinned up. You can spread out. You can work together with people that you need to be working together with. But also just having those serendipitous conversations. People have missed that whilst they've been working at home. They don't have the water cooler conversation or the chat whilst they're making a coffee. People want to replicate that. So how are you going to integrate that into the workplace? But we're also seeing the challenge of meetings. As we mentioned a moment ago, they're not all private. They could be done differently. And then social and well-being. If you've got the luxury of an outdoor space, then good for you. Make the most of it. 71% of people want outdoor space. In fact, they told us, I really like it at lunch that I just go out and sit in the garden, or I go for a walk. People are becoming more reconnected with nature. Well-being and the ability to relax and switch off is important. We need to be providing these types of spaces for people. So this means that the workplace has kind of got more of a balanced view between the ability to concentrate, but maybe less of that if more people are doing that at home, but more around collaboration. It's about meetings and it's socializing. It's the main functions of why people potentially are coming into the office. But make sure that you get the basics right. Give people natural daylight from where they're working or meeting. Give them spaces where they can disconnect and relax. Make sure everything's comfortable. Never forget proxemics. This is a personal space boundary that we all have, and it does vary in which country you're in. In the United Kingdom, we're at arm's length. We don't want anybody within that boundary. So think about the product that you put in. People generally don't sit on sofas if they don't know the other person. Think about armchairs. Just respect the basic needs and the psychology that people have to make them thrive and feel at their most comfortable. But everything is built around choice and variety. So the trends, what's going up? Flexibility. People just want autonomy. They want to choose how and where they're working, even down to the hours that they are working. It is about well-being. It's making sure that it's thought through, not only from a physical perspective, but also a mental health perspective. Lockdown has been challenging, particularly for the younger of the generations. The Generation Z and the millennials have suffered most from mental health. What measures are you putting in place to help cope with those particular impacts? It's about choice and variety. The days of people being locked down to one space have gone. People don't want that, and there's almost a rebellion against it. People are saying, I just want to move where I want to move to. But it's about digital connection. We've seen a massive digital revolution that's happened to enable this to work so effectively. How are you going to lace digital technology into all of your workplace settings? There are still going to be some people working from home. So we don't want to go back to a two-class system where people who are working remotely feel disconnected and overlooked. Now's your time to think about inclusivity and parity of experience. Make sure it's consistent. And there's an opportunity to be smarter. So we're seeing a lot of space reduction, rationalisation, global strategy that perhaps uses space in a more meaningful and effective way. What's going down? Presenteeism. There's no place for it. We've managed to successfully move ourselves out of it. It's about flexibility, and it's a culture of trust. So presenteeism, employees have told us they will not tolerate that. Residential. So this is a combination between sort of residential and commercial design coming together. A lot of offices felt like an extension of your home. We've also seen a trend going away from that slightly. The general thought is, I've just spent potentially 14 weeks working at home. Why do I want to go to an office and it looks like my home? People want it to feel quite different. So is there an opportunity for you there? It's less about large open plan. There is still a place for open plan, but in pockets and balance, and it needs to be acoustically managed. We need to think about distractions. This is about people performing effectively. They've learned to be productive. Let's not lose some of those good things. A lot of unnecessary meetings, people spending hours in meetings, that's kind of gone. People in virtual meetings get to the point a lot quicker. So a lot of unnecessary communication has been cut. And we're also seeing a rebellion against long leases. People no longer want that 10-year lease. They're looking at just flexibility. People are saying, I don't know what the next year looks like, let alone the next 10. So people want ultimate flexibility. Emerging issues before I finish. Just things to be aware of that we're noticing. We've noticed a little bit of issue coming through about an always-on culture. People aren't disconnecting. Because people's work pattern has shifted, they're having meeting requests come through at 8 o'clock at night, or they're finding that they're kind of constantly checking emails because some people are working at midnight or other people are starting at 5 a.m. That has an issue with it. There will be burnout, so keep an eye on that. Productivity amongst regular home workers has declined because everyone now is jumping onto meetings so much that a lot of their time is being consumed in virtual meetings. There's a little bit of an issue around those who are saying that they want to go back to the office, are also the people who are saying they're most concerned about their jobs. We wouldn't want to see the emergence of presenteeism creeping back in, so just keep an eye on that. But also the perception of client relationships potentially have weakened. So finally, old habits die hard. The 9 to 5 has been around for 300 years. Is the coronavirus pandemic enough to change it? It remains to be seen. It's an ingrained part of our nature and how we work. We have started to see a shift in recent years, but clearly what has helped is the working from home stigma has been removed. It no longer means that you're slacking or you're not working hard enough. There is a place, and it's opened up our opportunities of what work and workplace is all about. But permanent change is not going to happen overnight, which is why we're saying that changing a company culture requires a movement, not a mandate. Change is not going to be achieved by a leadership team just telling people, right, this is what you're going to do now. It actually needs a collective shift of hearts and minds of everybody who work towards a common purpose. And this will look different for every organisation, which is why it's important that you understand where you are. But from our perspective, it's incredibly reassuring to see that the alignment between employer and employee expectations is the strongest that we've ever seen it. So there's some really positive things emerging there. But finally, from the point for me, if we really do want to have a wider work culture change and break this 9 to 5, It is something that each and every one of you play a part in to make sure that we're achieving. Thank you very much. So I think we're going to try and look at some questions, if that's possible. So I think, oh, there's only one question that came through, and I know I've only got you for 4 more minutes. The change of functioning of offices to more co-working spaces where there are more places where you can hide or work in smaller groups. As we mentioned a moment ago, that question may have come in before we spoke about co-working. We're seeing less of a desire for it at the moment. I appreciate it though. On the basis that we said people are looking for more flexibility, particularly around leases, we might see co-working become more popular in future as things start to settle. And once we get to the point of vaccination programs or a therapeutic cure, it could be that actually flexibility does start to become the main priority here, and the rise of co-working spaces. But again, from the conversations I'm having with my clients, they're starting to look at, for example, WeWork. A lot of people know the WeWork model, and saying, well, why don't we just replicate the WeWork style in our own office, so that we're in control of that. So we're starting to see perhaps the like that people have towards the aesthetic of it, but integrated potentially into their own workspace. We will continue to monitor that and track it. We'll share more information as and when that comes through. I think there are some things that have generally come through on chat, probably a little bit more than comments. Any data on who wants to go to back to the office in terms of age and hierarchy? Yes, we do have that. The people who are wanting to go back are the younger generation at the moment, who are saying that they don't have the setup, they're house sharing, or they just don't have the right facilities. They're also a generation that learn and mentor from others. A lot of their social development skills are linked to that. They've been disconnected, so they are absolutely the generation that are wanting to go back. So yeah, there's loads of information and things we can share with you on hierarchy. If you're interested in that, please do get in touch with me and I will be able to share that with you. A lot of people saying, can we share the slide deck? Absolutely. We'll share all of that with you afterwards. I'm going to hand back over.
Well, thank you, Hannah, for this very interesting presentation. Would be very interested to see in a couple of months how things have evolved. And thank you all the participants for joining. We will send you a thank you note, including a link to rerun this webinar and to download Hannah's presentation. And there will be more information also included on the next webinar that will take place next week. And we hope to see you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.